In the quiet dawns of ancient Japan, when the wind moved through the pine groves like a cautious storyteller, and the roofs of wooden estates still held the night's cool breath, the upbringing of a future samurai began long before he learned to hold a blade, for his formation started in the stillness of the inner world, where no steel could reach and no teacher's shout could command swiftness. And it was in this realm that his character was molded with a patience as old as the mountains. From early childhood, he was surrounded not by the promise of victories or the intoxication of glory, but by the stern expectation that he would master himself first, because only a man who governed his emotions, who silenced pride, who tempered fear and desire, could one day be entrusted with the right to carry a sword. Elders watched how he reacted to misfortune, how he accepted reprimand, how he endured discomfort, for these small trials revealed whether the spirit within him was firm like bamboo or brittle like dry straw. The philosophy of Bushido was breathed into him not through speeches, but through the rhythm of household life, which taught that knowledge held meaning only when it served action, that wisdom mattered only when it shaped virtue, and that clarity of soul was always greater than brilliance of mind. In this world, the child grew under the unspoken rule that a warrior's first battlefield was his own heart, and each day challenged him to confront impulses more dangerous than any enemy. Yet, as he stood on the threshold of boyhood, sensing the weight of expectations gathering around him like the mist rising from temple stones, he understood only the beginning of this truth, unaware of how soon the path of learning would test the discipline of his actions in ways far sterner than words could foretell.
As the boy stepped into the long years of disciplined study, his days unfolded with a rigor that allowed no idle thought to linger, for each hour carried the silent demand that he forge not skill alone, but a steadiness of spirit that could endure trials far beyond the training grounds. From the first light of morning, he followed the structured rhythm of practice, the controlled breath before drawing the bowstring, the measured stance that preceded each movement of the katana, the weight of the horse beneath him responding to the firmness of his posture, and the quiet but unyielding grip required in jiu-jitsu, where strength meant little without composure. Yet martial mastery was only a single stream feeding the greater river of his formation, because beside the clang of wooden swords and the dust of riding paths, there lay the ink-stained world of calligraphy, poetry, and ethical teachings, through which his teachers shaped not his mind alone, but the very fiber of his character. Even the simple act of writing demanded discipline, since every stroke of the brush revealed hesitation, arrogance, impatience, or humility, becoming a mirror of the inner world he could not hide or excuse. Literature was approached not as ornament, but as labor. Philosophical texts were not read for cleverness, but for the slow sharpening of will, and each lesson was a reminder that knowledge meant nothing if it did not transform behavior. Over time, he learned that study was less a gathering of information and more a daily confrontation with his own weaknesses, and the school dojo became a place where the noise of effort concealed an unspoken truth, that every science he practiced pushed him farther towards self-command. Yet, as he grew older and his responsibilities expanded, he found himself entering a stage of training where the value of wealth and comfort would be challenged with a severity that few were prepared to endure. And in this test, his spirit would learn whether it could remain unbound by the world's temptations or fall captive to them.
With adolescence came lessons that no weapon drill or calligraphy exercise could soften, for the boy was now expected to understand why a samurai's strength depended not only on courage and training, but on his ability to live free from the weight of possessions. From the earliest days of this new stage, he witnessed how elders treated wealth not as a comfort, but as a threat, something capable of dulling judgment, softening resolve, and eroding the hardness of spirit required to face both war and fate. Houses of the warrior class often appeared austere, with bare floors, minimal decoration, and a simplicity that allowed no distraction from duty. And in this environment, children were raised without reference to riches, rarely touching money, sometimes not even knowing the cost of the basic items around them. Poverty, at least the outward form of it, was cultivated deliberately because it taught detachment, independence, and the belief that a man who owned too much might one day fear losing what he possessed more than he feared losing honor. The young samurai learned that luxury was not forbidden because it was sinful, but because it was weakening, a subtle poison that made the soul sluggish and the will fragile. And so he ate simple food, wore unembellished garments, and accepted discomfort as a natural companion of virtue. When he envied a merchant child for his toys or fine clothes, the quiet reprimand of his teacher reminded him that true nobility was found in self-restraint, not indulgence. Over time, the boy noticed a change within himself. The lack of wealth no longer felt like deprivation, but like freedom, a release from dependence on anything the world could offer or take away. Yet this inner liberation was only one part of his shaping, for soon he would face another discipline, one far deeper and more sacred, where the presence of a teacher standing as both guide and moral mirror would become the defining force of his spiritual growth, and the bond formed there would test his understanding of loyalty beyond all previous lessons.
As the young samurai matured, he entered a period in which the presence of his teacher became the axis around which his entire inner world revolved. For in samurai society, the mentor was not merely an instructor, but a sculptor of the soul, whose guidance carried a weight that surpassed even the authority of one's own parents. The ancient saying, "The father gives life, the teacher makes a man," followed him through every lesson, reminding him that his moral spine, his sense of restraint, his future honor, all depended on the example set before him in the quiet figure of the one who led him. The teacher's life embodied the ideals he spoke. He lived simply, often in austere poverty, wearing the same worn robes for decades, accepting hardship with calm dignity, never letting misfortune distort his voice or cloud his gaze. He taught less through explanation and more through presence, for his every movement conveyed a discipline so refined that it felt like a silent sermon. How he arranged his writing tools with deliberate care, how he paused before answering a question as though weighing the truth inside it, how he endured the chill of winter training without shivering, setting a model of stoic endurance that no verbal lecture could equal. Each day the student returned to him with equal parts trepidation and devotion, because each encounter felt like a ritual, a purification in which arrogance was stripped away, impatience tempered, and the restless energies of youth subdued. In this relationship, learning transformed into a sacred act, and the dojo became less a hall of instruction and more a sanctuary where the mind was slowly cleansed of vanity and the will forged into something unyielding. Yet even as the boy grew into a young man shaped by this profound bond, he sensed that the most demanding trial still lay ahead, for the wisdom of his teacher had prepared him only for the threshold of the greatest challenge, the lifelong struggle for self-control, where even the strength gained through years of discipline would be tested against the deepest storms of the human heart.
As the young samurai stepped into adulthood, he discovered that all the years of training, all the disciplines of body and mind, were only preparations for the true battlefield, the invisible terrain of human emotion, where the slightest weakness could undo a lifetime of effort. From his earliest lessons, he had been taught that strength without self-command was nothing more than unrefined force, dangerous both to others and to the one who wielded it,
and now he faced the trials meant to reveal whether his spirit could remain still, even as the world around him shifted with sorrow, fear, or pain. He observed how seasoned warriors endured wounds without complaint, how they stood unmoved during ceremonies of loss, how even the death of a close relative did not draw visible grief from their faces, for they believed that emotion, though natural, should never claim authority over honor. The young warrior soon confronted this philosophy in a scene that marked him deeply. Soldiers gathering before departure to the front, families standing beside them in heavy silence, not a single cry piercing the air, only bowed heads, controlled breaths, and the quiet rustle of garments as final farewells were exchanged without touch or tears. This moment revealed to him that self-control was not the suppression of feeling, but the mastery of it, the ability to carry sorrow with dignity, and to allow pain to deepen resolve rather than break it. Yet he also saw how some masked suffering behind faint, almost gentle smiles, as though offering the world reassurance even when their hearts trembled beneath the surface. And he understood that Bushido demanded not coldness, but an inner steadiness strong enough to protect others from one's own turmoil. Still, with each test, he realized how narrow the line was between endurance and silence, between composure and emotional exile. And he sensed that the final lesson of his upbringing, one that would bind together all the knowledge, humility, and fortitude he had cultivated, was approaching like a distant storm, preparing to reveal the true meaning of balance, the highest virtue a samurai could ever attain. With the passing of years and the deepening of experience, the samurai came to understand that the path of his upbringing was never intended to create a man of rigid silence or emotionless steel. For every trial, every deprivation, every lesson in restraint had been designed to guide him toward a harmony so subtle that only a fully matured spirit could perceive its shape. He realized that self-control was not the icy stillness of someone untouched by the world, but the quiet strength of one who faced suffering without allowing it to deform his judgment. And in this realization, he saw how the many elements of his education, martial discipline, intellectual refinement, reverence for teachers, and rejection of excess, had converged into a single, unbroken line of purpose. The simplicity in which he had been raised was no longer a burden, but a liberation, for he felt unchained from desires that ruled so many others. The stoic endurance he had cultivated no longer felt like self-denial, but like a gesture of respect toward life, which he refused to meet with agitation or fear. The loyalty he bore his teacher no longer felt like duty alone, but like gratitude toward the man who had shaped his inner world. In this synthesis of strength and tranquility, the samurai discovered the essence of Bushido. The warrior's greatest victory was always internal, invisible to crowds, won in solitary moments when temptation, pride, or despair rose like shadows and were met with unwavering resolve. And as he stood beneath the quiet sky, feeling the world move around him with the steady rhythm of things long understood, he sensed the final truth of his journey settling into place, not as revelation, but as the natural consequence of a life lived in disciplined harmony. For it was said among the old masters that he who has conquered himself no longer fears either the sword or fate. And in those words, the samurai recognized the culmination of all he had become, unaware that life itself would soon test whether this balance of spirit could withstand the storms yet to come.